Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When this Parliament started, I had the opportunity to meet in the middle of the floor with the new Housing Minister to talk about what his new portfolio would entail. And at that point in time, I told him very clearly that what he should do is just throw out what he had and start over anew, because all the advice he'd been given, and I've seen over the last 6 years since I've been in this House, was a bunch of garbage and a bunch of non-results from the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. The entire bureaucracy that he's in charge of at this point in time has just layered on more and more spending and has accomplished nothing. That's a preamble to my speech about where we need to go in this country, Mr. Speaker. But I'll say since 2019, the federal government has introduced or expanded roughly a dozen major housing programs and initiatives, layer upon layer, on top of its existing strategies. Today, we're looking at a system with overlapping funds, loan programs, and agencies, and now a brand new Crown Corporation added to the mix. All of this sits within a $100 billion plus national housing strategy that was designed not as a single focused solution, but as a collection of complementary programs. The problem is not a lack of federal activity. It is that this growing web of programs is not translating into the number of homes Canadians actually need. But instead of focusing on why that is happening, this bill takes us in the wrong direction, because Bill C-20 is not really about building homes. It's about building another federal bureaucracy. We have to be honest about what is driving housing costs in this country. The number one factor is not a lack of ideas. It is not a lack of programs. It is the cost of building, and that cost is increasingly driven by government. Taxes, fees, regulations, and constant changes to the rules of the game. We heard this across the country when I was chairing the Economic Growth Council. Every time a government changes a building code, adds a requirement, or delays a permit, it adds costs. And those costs don't disappear. They get passed directly onto the home buyer or the renter. Mr. Speaker, we have seen what happens when governments overreact with broad top-down policies. In Ontario, we now see entire segments of the housing market dominated by 500 square foot condo units. Those are not being built because families were demanding them. They were being built because policy decisions pushed the market in that direction. That is what happens when government tries to centrally shape outcomes instead of enabling the market to respond to real demand. And we are seeing a similar lesson play out in my hometown of Calgary. Over the last 4 years, the municipal government in Calgary took a blanket rezoning approach, promoted as a solution to affordability. But what actually happened? A recent assessment showed that the primary beneficiaries were not homebuyers. They were land speculators and developers who captured the increased value. Communities suffered while affordability did not materially improve, and Calgarians took notice. That is why we saw a political reset at the municipal level. Politicians were thrown out for their false start in what they said they were trying to do versus what they were actually accomplishing. People understand that simply changing zoning everywhere without addressing costs and implementation does not automatically result in affordable homes. This brings us to Bill C-20. Instead of addressing the structural cost drivers in the system, the government is expanding its footprint. Build Canada Homes will have sweeping powers, financing, land acquisition, development authority, and it will come with a significant price tag, another $13 billion over 5 years. But the question Canadians should be asking is simple. What are we getting for that money? Because the evidence suggests not very much. Even government-backed analysis shows this program will deliver only a fraction of the homes that are promised, 5,200 projected homes per year. At the same time, we're expanding the size of government, more administrators, more overhead, more layers. That cost does not build homes, it builds bureaucracies. And we must consider the cost per unit. When government steps in as developer, costs tend to rise, not fall. Projects take longer, risk increases, accountability becomes less clear, and ultimately taxpayers are left carrying that burden. We are effectively asking Canadians who are already dealing with high housing costs to also fund an expanded federal structure that has no clear targets for delivery. Mr. Speaker, experts have already warned about this. They told committee that Build Canada Homes lacks clear goals, lacks targets, and lacks accountability. So we're not only expanding government, we're doing so without a clear measure of success. Monsieur le Président, il est évident.
Mr. Speaker, it is clear that housing is too expensive in Canada. We need to be clear about the causes of this. Taxes, fees, and regulations that are causing construction costs to go up. With all these new regulations and delays, we are seeing higher and higher costs. And these costs are constantly being paid by Canadians. Bill C-20 does not fix these problems. On the contrary, it increases the size of government and it creates more red tape. As experts have said at committee, we do not have clear targets and we do not have accountability mechanisms. We need these measures, not more red tape. We need an environment where developers can build more quickly and at a lower cost.
Cost escalation. Well, we bring discipline and stability to building codes, reduce delays and uncertainty in approvals, limit the growth of government structures that add costs without adding supply, and ensure that public money actually delivers measurable results. Mr. Speaker, Canadians are already under significant financial pressure. We are seeing rising debt levels and more households stretched to their limits. They cannot afford policies that increase costs, whether directly through housing prices or indirectly through higher government spending. At the end of the day, this is all about outcomes. Are we building more homes? Are we lowering costs? Are we improving affordability? On all three counts, this bill falls short. Bill C-20 expands government, it increases spending, and it avoids the real work of addressing the cost drivers that are holding back supply. I will continue to support solutions that focus on what actually matters, lowering the cost of building homes that Canadians need, making home ownership achievable again for Canadians, including the people of Calgary and across Alberta. There's many ways we can get involved in this at the federal perspective, but as I told the minister when he first took this portfolio, the main thing he can do is second-guess the people who've been giving this government advice for the last 11 years, because all they've done is added cost to the system, added cost to the building of homes, added cost to Canadians, including more debt. Now, this is a ridiculous amount of money that's continuing to be spent in the sector for housing. People need housing. It's the #1 expense for all Canadians now across the board. Cannot continue to add more cost to the basic needs of shelter in our society, not to mention what's happening with food inflation in this country. But housing inflation is definitely something that we've got to get under control. This bill does nothing of the sort. This bill adds costs, and that cost will be borne by Canadians. Think about the cost of debt per household in society. The cost of paying debt is about $3,400 per household. The average rent in Calgary on a 2-bedroom house is $1,700 per month. So every Canadian family is actually, in Calgary, is actually paying 2 months' worth of rent to cover the debt being paid, the interest being paid on the federal debt right now. That's an atrocious amount of money that adds to the cost of everything that we have to pay in society at this point in time, Mr. Speaker. This continues. This is just the federal level. Of course, there's provincial debt, there's municipal debt, there's corporate debt, but there's personal debt. This does nothing. This bill will do nothing to reduce that debt level that Canadians are facing. It'll make things less affordable. It'll make things worse for Canadians. We oppose it strongly, Mr. Speaker. I'm willing to entertain questions. Thank you.